we are now live.
Appears that we're now live, so welcome to anybody who are joining in, and may the 4th be with you. I'll call the meeting for Tuesday, May 4th to order, and looking to the agenda, are there any changes or additions?
There are none from administration.
Thanks very much, in which case I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And looking to the minutes of March 30th, are there any errors or omissions on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move those minutes be approved as shown. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And looking to the minutes of the April 6th regular meeting of council, are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be accepted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And looking to the minutes of the April 13th special meeting of council, are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving then to item G1, Traffic and Road Use Bylaw Amendment 2021-11. Mr. Burt, welcome.
Good morning, Mayor Borman, members of council. It's lovely to see you. Recommendation today is that council gives first, second, and third readings to Traffic and Road Use Bylaw Amendment 2021-11, known as the Street Closure Amendment. The amendment to the bylaw is being brought forward for a few reasons. One, to support the 2021 downtown Main Street closure that is being put in place to help keep the community safe and support our local economy as we continue through the COVID-19 pandemic. To enhance safety based on feedback from the 2020 Main Street debrief, some of which included, how do we manage safe cycling behavior? So we have amended section 13 of the bylaw to read, a person riding a bicycle on a sidewalk, multi-use trail, or in a closure / special event area shall yield the right of way to pedestrians. That's amendment number 1. To support this, we are increasing our bylaw services staff this summer. Traditionally, we have 2 seasonal staff. This year, with the COVID contingency fund, we've added 2 additional. Therefore, we'll have 4 bylaw services staff patrolling downtown Quarry Lake. The second issue is to ensure that there is appropriate emergency vehicle access through the main pedestrian zone. So the pedestrian zone permit has been updated to read, for safety, accessibility, and emergency response, a clear zone of 3 meters from the yellow center line must be kept free and clear of obstructions. And section 112 of the bylaw has been amended to include wording for failing to comply with a permit. So it is being amended to read, any person who contravenes any provision of this bylaw or condition of written permission issued pursuant to this bylaw, for which a penalty is not set out in Schedule A of this bylaw, is liable to a minimum penalty of $250. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we included the internal stakeholder group, the Fire Rescue Department, and the BIA. That brings me to the end of my presentation.
Well, that's the way we like them, Mr. Burt.
I keep it short and sweet.
Concise, to the point. Thank you very much.
You're
So the 3 meter wide emergency access zone, so 3 meters from the yellow center line. So effectively that encompasses what currently or has been the driving lane. So the parking lane is outside of that 3 meter from the center line.
Essentially, yes.
Right. So any businesses on Main Street that are setting anything up have to they have to be within that clearly defined area.
Correct.
Right. When reviewing the agenda, it was interesting to note in the current bylaw, the direction that a person riding a bicycle on multi-use trail shall yield the right of way to pedestrians. I think we should remind cyclists of that, because I'm off using the multi-use trails regularly, and more often than not, I see pedestrians yielding to cyclists.
I agree. I feel that's a good reminder.
In any case, I don't have any other questions about your about the bylaw amendment. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. Thank you, Mr. Burt, for your presentation. So I'm understanding this is 3 meters from the center line on both sides of the center line. So essentially that's 6 meters down the middle of Main Street will be clear.
Yes.
Okay. And that's where the cyclists will be riding their bikes and the pedestrians will be walking. So there's only obstructions allowed in the parking lanes, kind of like we have the patios right now.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, when it said 3 meters from the center line, I wasn't quite exactly sure what that meant, but you clarified it. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Burt? Seeing none, thanks very much for your report today. And with that, I will move the council give first reading to Traffic and Road Use Bylaw Amendment 2021-11, street closures. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Is Councillor Seeley's feed live? I think we've lost Councillor Seeley. I didn't see him vote there.
I think Councillor Seeley is frozen.
Okay, it's as though he stepped out of the meeting, so the vote was unanimous. I'll then move the council give second reading to Traffic and Road Use Bylaw Amendment 2021-11, street closures. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council go to the third reading of the Traffic and Road Use Bylaw Amendment. Those in favor? Carried unanimously, and I'll then move the council give third reading to Traffic and Road Use Bylaw Amendment 2021-11, street closures. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Councillor Seeley is back. Moving on then to item G2, Property Tax Bylaw 2021-13 and Supplementary Property Tax Bylaw 2021-14. Mrs. Richardson, I have a feeling this one won't be quite as quick as the last agenda item.
I'm afraid not. Mr. Burt's a tough act to follow. We've got a lot to get through, so I will try to keep it as short and sweet as property taxes possibly can be. Can you see the notes?
Yeah, we can see the notes as well as the
I'm
screen.
going to swap it. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, that's good.
Right screen now. Perfect. Okay, so I'm here today, as you mentioned, regarding the property tax bylaw and supplementary property tax bylaw. As an update to where we are currently sitting in the process, assessments were mailed out back on February 12th, and property owners had until April 21st to resolve any questions they may have had with the assessor or to file a formal assessment appeal. Our recommendation today is that council give first, second, and third reading to property tax rate bylaw 2021-13, and that council give first, second, and third reading to supplementary property tax rate bylaw 2021-14. Some procedural notes right off the bat. Property tax rates must be set through bylaw, and that responsibility cannot be delegated. Everything prepared has been done in accordance with the property tax policy, which was established back in 2015. As council is well aware, municipalities have limited revenue generation opportunities under the MGA. It really is just property taxes or fees and fines. The amount of the property tax requirement is determined by first establishing the cost of delivering programs and services as part of the budget process, which for 2021 is $58 million. Then subtracting the revenue from all other sources, such as fees and fines and grants. The remainder is the amount of tax to collect. This for 2021 is $27 million. These are the amounts that need to be collected through property taxes. The municipal tax and vital homes, formerly PAH, amounts are set through the budget process. The seniors requisition amount comes from Bow Valley Regional Housing, and the designated industrial property tax comes from Alberta Municipal Affairs. We've also received a preliminary education property tax requisition from the province for use when setting annual tax rates. The analogy that we've used in the past is the pies, so these are the different pies we're trying to slice up. Compared to 2020, municipal taxes increased 4.5% net of growth. The vital homes amount is at the same level as it was in 2020. And the seniors requisition is up $652,000, about 71%. And Mr. Wilson is joining us today and will be able to address any questions regarding that requisition. For provincial education taxes, while the province has held the overall collection to the 2020 level, since our equalized assessment increased, our assessments increased more than those for most of the province, we are allocated more of that collection. So you may have seen this image before. This is a chart that we've used in the past. So for every dollar of property tax collected, 53 cents is what goes towards our municipal programs and services, and that does include the vital homes portion. 44 cents goes to the province for the delivery of Alberta's education system, and the remaining 3 cents goes to Bow Valley Regional Housing for that supportive living accommodation for seniors in the Bow Valley. Now, how we slice up those pies is through assessments. Again, to extend the analogy, this is how we would determine the size of the slices. The assessment needs to comply with the Standard of Assessment Regulation, which is established by the Municipal Government Act, the MGA. The Audit Branch of Alberta Municipal Affairs monitors assessments to confirm assessors have applied legislation appropriately and that assessments are prepared using the same value standards for all properties and that the subsequent assessments are fair and equitable. With regards to that process, assessments in Alberta are prepared using mass appraisal, which values a group of properties based on common data, mathematical models, and statistical tests. It's efficient in that it lets our assessors accurately value a large number of properties in a relatively short time frame. And now this is the result of that process for this year. So this is the assessment information in aggregate with the totals by category. The increase in taxable assessment of $115 million is composed of both real growth of $147 million, and that's the assessed value of new properties that did not previously exist, and market decline of $32 million, and that's the net decrease in the assessed value of existing properties. One note on classification. So each year, owners of tourist home properties who are not renting their property out have the option of completing a statutory declaration in accordance with the property tax policy. And the fluctuations in the properties that complete this declaration contribute to the changes in the assessment for those types of properties. It's not always the same properties in each category in any given year. So again, as was clarified with that last chart, the difference between tourist homes and these charts as well depends on the statutory declarations filed each year. So here we focused on the median assessments for each residential classification. The top chart is by classification and the lower chart is by property type. On the non-residential side, there is a significant amount of variation between property types, which makes median values less meaningful as a reference point. So we'll talk about the increase per 100,000 later, and we'll include non-residential there. When it comes to then applying this information to the required tax amounts, the first step is to determine the desired split of municipal taxes between residential and non-residential. We're recommending to keep it at 65-35, consistent with last year and in line with our competitors and neighbors. So that is included as attachment 1 in your package, and that's page 24 of the digital package if you're following along. And then we split each of those portions based on this assessed value. So to speak a little more about that attachment 1, so this is the comparison to our competitors. So those municipalities that are in the same or similar market from an economic perspective. And this is based on what happened last year. You'll see it's 2020 data, which is the most recent data we have available. So on the assessment share side, the average for our competitor data set is 82% residential, 18% non-residential. That's unchanged from the previous year. And here in Canmore, we're at a slightly higher portion residential, 84% residential versus 16% non-residential. And that did change by 1 percentage point compared to the prior year. When we look at the tax share for our competitors, again, it's at 66-34, unchanged from the previous year, and which supports us keeping our Canmore split at 65-35. Next, we have our neighbors as compared to our competitors. So the average for this data set is 79% residential for the assessment share and 21% non-residential, compared to our Canmore split at 84-16, again, same as the previous slide for our portion. And then the tax share, again, for our neighbors is at 68% residential, 32% non-residential, again, very close to the split we're recommending staying at 65-35. So to speak a little more to the calculations, so once we've determined the required split in accordance with the property tax policy, and again, we're recommending to keep that split at 65-35, each split is then divided up based on those assessment values we were looking at to determine the appropriate mill rates. And as a reminder, the mill rate is the dollar value of taxes per $1,000 of assessed value. And the property tax bylaw sets out those mill rates for each of the different classifications. And as a reminder, not all properties pay all taxes. There are different combinations of the tax types that properties pay depending on the nature of that property. So based on the budgeted amounts, the received requisitions, the determined split, and the assessment data, everything we've just gone through, this is where the mill rates land. So 2 items I wanted to note here. So number 1 is where we can, when we look at the tourist home line is where we see the multiplier, the 2.9 to 1 ratio for tourist homes. And secondly, the MGA wants municipalities to conform to a tax ratio of residential to non-residential in the mill rate of no greater than 5-1. And so we can see that for non-residential, we're currently at 3.21-1. So we're well under that threshold. So to quantify the impact of those rates, this is an illustrative example of municipal taxes only, and it does include, again, vital homes on a residential property. And just as a caveat, these will only be reflective if you increased by that exact percentage change in assessment, but it gives a rough indication. So as an example, if you had a $690,000 assessment last year and it didn't change at all, if we isolate change in assessment from the change in our property tax requirement, and we're only looking at municipal here, your taxes would have gone from $1,568 to $1,624, so an increase of $56. And with the average residential increase at 1%, most changes would only be slightly greater than this. But change is affected by both the change in the rates and also how your property is changed in relation to other properties. And that's what this chart demonstrates, is the impact that the change in assessed value has on the taxes you pay. And this is what those mill rates look like per 100,000. So here we're not talking about the change. We're just looking at what the mill rate applied to 100,000 would result in for each of the categories. And this is where we have included non-residential again as a benchmark for any non-residential property owners. So this chart on the left shows the number of residential dwellings, again, looking at that competitor data set, and it gives kind of an indication of size of the competitors we're using. And the chart on the right shows residential tax per dwelling. So the average residential tax per dwelling for our competitor data set is $1,809. That's increased slightly from the prior year. And here in Canmore, we're at $1,972, so slightly higher. If we move on to our neighbors, again, the same data set, but for our neighbors, again, on the left, we have the number of residential dwellings for the comparable size. On the right, we have the residential tax per dwelling. Here we see the average residential tax per dwelling for our neighbor data set is $1,998. And so with ours at $1,972, we're slightly under the average on the neighbor's side. And this all goes to support continuing that split at 65-35. Finally, to speak briefly to the supplementary tax bylaw, the budget does include $25,000 in supplementary taxes, and this is for properties completed before October 1st. We must have a bylaw in place in order to collect supplementary taxes, and the rates are the same rates as in the property tax rate bylaw. So in conclusion, the recommendation today is that council give first, second, and third reading to property tax rate bylaw 2020-12, and that council give first, second, and third reading to supplementary property tax rate bylaw 2020-13. And that concludes my presentation today. I'll open it up now for any questions. And as I mentioned previously, I believe Mr. Wilson is here with us as well to speak to the Bow Valley Regional Housing Requisition if there are any questions on that.
Great, thanks very much, Ms. Richardson. And I think to respect Mr. Wilson's time, perhaps we could ask Mr. Wilson to join in now and speak a little bit about the seniors requisition. And then if he has work to do, he can leave the meeting. Mr. Wilson. There you are. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate that. So in Ms. Richardson's report, she speaks briefly but fairly clearly to what's driven the increase in the seniors requisition, which is noted related to fiscal planning for 2021 COVID-19 response and phase 2 of the Canmore Seniors Lodge expansion capital and startup costs. Do you mind just speaking briefly to both those points?
No, not at all. My pleasure. We faced a bit of a perfect storm in 2020, as the whole world did, I suppose. But just before COVID broke, we, the board and senior management, agreed to contribute $900,000 to finish or to make sure that phase 2, the DSL/4 facility, proceeded. So as you may or may not recall, the province built phase 1, $13 million or so, and then they contributed about $16 million to phase 2, which will give us 60 beds of that high level care that we've been working on for so long, as we all know. Unfortunately, the 16 million wasn't quite enough to give us the facility that would be most appropriate for that client group. And so, again, the board, just before COVID, decided to provide $900,000 out of our reserves to keep the project going. Then COVID hit, and as we all know, that was quite a ride and still is. And we were incredibly successful. We kept COVID out of both of our lodges. None of our staff, none of our residents got sick to date, knock on lots of wood, but that came at quite a cost. So we drained our operating contingency reserve, and essentially we spent $800,000 on our COVID response in 2020, and we expect to spend roughly $600,000 or $700,000 in 2021 on those things. So essentially, we need this additional requisition to start to replenish those operating contingency reserves. We cannot, in good conscience, operate without a cushion, which we learned in 2020 was so valuable and important. We have to continue to protect our seniors, even though the good news is 97% of our lodge residents are fully vaccinated, and most of our staff are too. And it's going to take some money to commission the new facility. So in early 2022, we'll open those 60 beds of DSL4 and dementia care. Long time coming, affordable public rates. It's exciting for the Valley, but it's going to cost some money. And as you may recall, over the last 4 years, we've been requisitioning funds every year for the FF&E fund. We understood a long time ago that the province was going to pay the bulk of the capital costs, but BVRH was going to furnish and equip both this lodge, phase 1 that I'm in right now, and phase 2. So we have approximately $1 million in the FF&E fund, but we need another $150,000 or so to get us over the top. We need a couple of $100,000 for the commissioning and the startup of operations. Looking forward to filling those beds in 2022. I think that captures that. Any questions?
Yeah, no, that was very succinct. I appreciate that. And I have to say, I'm so impressed by the job that you and your team have done at the lodge. I mean,
Thank you.
Second to none. And when we see the news from around the country of the really devastating effect of COVID, particularly in seniors lodges, I'm so grateful to the work you and your team have been doing. So please pass that along to all of your staff.
Well, thank you.
And I'm certain I speak for council on that. So what I'm understanding then is the brunt of this increase in requisition is related to COVID, the cost effect of COVID-19, and some part of the requisition increase is related to the new project.
That's right.
That was the detail I was trying to clarify for myself. Both those needs are real, and certainly after all that's gone into planning and building to this point, phase 2, we're going to see it through, and we're going to make sure that it's the best it can be. So I personally have no concern about the increased requisition that you've just detailed, and but I appreciate your sharing those details with us. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for that presentation. Will we be looking at a similar requisition increase next year when the 60 beds become operationalized?
I don't expect so. We actually expect those operations to begin to reduce our overall requisition as we begin to achieve some more economies of scale. And hopefully COVID isn't costing us money in 2022.
And can I just ask a question out of curiosity? Do many of your staff work full-time at your facility, or do they circulate amongst other jobs?
Most of our staff are full-time at the facility, but lots of them also have part-time jobs elsewhere in the community.
And you've still managed to keep your facility COVID-free?
We did. I mean, we jumped on it very early. We were watching the coronavirus early because that's part of our emergency planning, is to watch such things. And then we made a very conscious effort very early also to do what we could to not only hire a bunch more people, we increased our staffing model by 40%, which was fun, but also to help those people isolate if they needed to, follow all the rules. But also some people weren't able to work their part-time jobs, so we were working with them on hours and wages and things like that. Does that answer that question?
Yes, absolutely. Fantastic. We're very proud of you, and we're very proud of what Canmore has done in that regard. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just one question before Councillor Comfort. The question is related to, well, specifically, is this requisition increase expected to be sort of a one-time, or will that that requisition continue to be the norm through future years?
This is expected to be the largest one time. However, when I spoke to replenishing a lodge operating contingency reserve, this will only replenish half of it. So we expect to replenish the remainder over the next year or two.
So we shouldn't be expecting then to see the annual requisition reduce back to what we had understood to be the sort of normal annual.
The norm.
Yeah.
Probably not in
Is this the
2020.
new reality?
I don't think this is the long-term or even the midterm new reality. I think this is a very short-term expectation. And in my early modeling for 2022 requisitions, they're lower than this year.
Right. Great. That's what I was understanding. Councillor Comfort, you had a question? You're mute, Councillor Comfort.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I now live in the seniors lodge in Canmore. And I have to attest to the care and diligence with which the staff and the administration has looked after business. And it's very impressive, and it's very comforting to feel so safe. That's the first part. And then I just was curious as to how much of this requisition will be attributed to the capital costs of the new ADSL facility.
Mhm. The overall requisition capital costs depends on how you break it out. 150,000 of it is for FF&E. That includes a $250,000 generator, backup power for the facility. It's important to note that we are encouraging the province to cover those costs, but we are budgeting for them just in case they do not. We'll do everything we can, though, to seek replenishment of those costs. And then in terms of direct capital, out of that $900,000 that we have committed to the actual capital building design project of it, there's an outstanding $80,000 or so that we will have to cover out of our reserves that these requisitions will help to replenish or fill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your kind words, Desmond.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Wilson? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today. And of course, you're welcome to stay in the meeting. But if you have other work that you should be doing, feel free to
do
leave.
it. I appreciate it. Thank you all. Have a great day. Take care.
The just looking at the growth, the noted growth of it's up above $8 billion in taxable assessment now in Canmore. That's such a large number. It's hard to understand that kind of number. I know most of our neighboring municipalities don't have total taxable assessment in that range, but thinking about what's happened this year, the huge demand on homes in Canmore and the related rapid growth in sales values, I guess it's safe to assume that next year's assessment will be even greater. I mean, if we're seeing property values going up by 10 or 15%, whatever it is, I think it's in that range, just because of the demand of related to COVID. Arguably, that will put the assessment up. Well, not 10%, but there'll be a factor there. So crazy amount of assessment. And I don't know if I have a question about this. I'm just rambling on, but the people I'm thinking about, the people that have recently bought homes in Canmore at those what I would suggest are COVID inflated rates. No doubt when they're looking at their considering the purchase, they were looking at last year's tax bill for that property, and hopefully they'll understand how taxes work and are related to assessment, and how purchasing a property for a lot more than it was worth a year ago is going to drive the assessment up. Anyways, I'm looking, I guess, for councillor questions for Ms. Richardson. I think Councillor McCallum has her hand up.
I do, Mayor Barman. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question of administration with regards to, I'm on page 19 of the report. There's the table that includes the increased, and I want to make sure I'm understanding what I'm looking at, the total increased assessment for certain classifications. So for instance, residential overall in Canmore has a net increase of 1.9%. But tourist home and tourist home personal use have gone up 8.2%, as well as 9.4% for the personal use. I find that kind of interesting. So the tourist home personal use, which is essentially residential, is gone up 7.5% more than the residential, for essentially what is as a personal use, plain old residential. Is there any anything you can add to that? Ms. Richardson, any commentary?
The assessors would probably be able to speak to this better than I will, so take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. But what I did try to reference a little bit in the presentation is the challenge we have a little bit with the tourist home and tourist home personal use properties, because the properties that are in both of those categories are the same, but which of those two they fall in any year, it's different properties each year, depending on who files the personal use statutory declaration. So it could be a mix in the types of properties that declared personal use or not. That's always the challenge there. So we are talking about quite similar properties, especially the personal use ones that are essentially residential properties, but that mix is always difficult to attribute to because it's not always the same properties year to year, if that makes sense.
Clearly within the market, it seems that they command a premium, even just here based on assessment itself, as assessment is based on sales data. That's kind of interesting. But I guess my next question is that knowing that the tourist home, not personal use, tourist home being used as a tourist home is actually, what is basically a commercial use is actually taxed not quite as commercial is. So non-residential, which is 3.21 to 1, and tourist home is 2.9 to 1 for a property that essentially has the ability to command the same income as a commercial matched unit. I guess I'm bringing this up. I don't really have anything to offer right now, but I wonder if administration has any recommendations moving forward to provide more equity amongst that use with commercial itself, if it's being claimed as a tourist home, not tourist home personal use.
So the rate the multiplier at 2.9 versus the 3.2, it does kind of exist somewhere between a residential and a true commercial non-residential visitor accommodation property. That is a legacy from the property tax policy circa 2015. And I believe the work of the property, it's always a tongue twister, tax force. Yeah. Yes, correct.
True.
From before that time. It has been on our action list for some time to revisit the tourist home designation, the processes around that, and also the whole implication on of the program. It is somewhat unique to Canmore. So the program has been on our list for review in the future. That policy is now a number of years old. But to take that on is a significant amount of work, but work that we would be looking to do in the next little bit. And I see Ms. Rogers has joined me.
I just wanted to add that the use of the property doesn't actually change the assessment. So all tourist homes are assessed the same, and then the mill rate fluctuates based on that designation. Yeah, so that was all I wanted to add. Thank you, Mr. Irwin, for popping in the background.
Mr. Irwin does
Our phone a friend, yes.
You don't even have to phone him. He just arrives with magical information. Yeah, no, I understand that. I just feel, as we're seeing how tourist homes are rolling out in our community with the personal use, I think we're realizing more and more that these are basically commercial properties. And so I think it would behoove the next council definitely to take a look at that in terms of an equity perspective amongst similarly used property. Is that a proper word? Similar, yeah. Yeah, that's all I wanted to bring up. And I was wondering if there was any commentary. My next question had to do with appeals.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt. Councillor Ms. DeSoto had something to add.
Yes, thank you, Councillor McCallum, for asking that question. And I did just want to add to that conversation. It has been a difficult conversation and one we've had with council numerous times. But as many on council will recall, administration's recommendation has always been that we don't tax based on actual use. So the fact that we allow this declaration annually to decide as a property owner whether you're going to use it personally or use it commercially is rare, and I would say against best practice and what administration would recommend. So at some point in the future, if you look at the assessments at 66 million, it's about a quarter of our tourist home assessments are declaring personal use. So if at any point we want to remove that declaration, there will be that group of property owners that would see a significant increase in tax. But it's essentially taxing based on actual use versus permitted use is not a best practice and not something we would recommend as a long-term go-forward strategy. So I just wanted to highlight that again.
Yeah,
Great, thank you.
and I appreciate that. How many properties does the tourist home personal use actually represent? Do we know?
If you bear with me one moment, I can try to pull the number of roles in that category. So the personal use is in 2021, 127 tax rolls. So 127 properties.
Okay, thank you. I had another question and then you interrupted me, John.
Well, while you're thinking about that, I'll turn the mic over to Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. We'll give Councillor McCallum a moment to come back with that.
Yeah.
Great question. I'm wondering about the vacant serviced. It's gone down 8.2%. Can you just describe how that might have happened?
Again, the assessments are all done by the assessor, so I can absolutely take some of these questions back and try to get some further information to council. It could depend on which properties developed in any given year and have now moved and contributed to the growth overall that we saw and are no longer vacant service land. So it depends on which properties are developed in any given year and moving out of that category.
Yeah, that was my conjecture, that vacant service has now become developed and that it's now diminishing the vacant service property pool overall. So that,
and how those properties values compared to other properties that are left.
And not necessarily the property values have gone down, but the pool of vacant service has gone down.
If I look at the number of tax rolls in that category, they have gone down. So there has been development on those lots.
There were a few years ago, we were given an indication of how many hotel rooms and short-term rental properties there were in the community. Do we have any idea about that now? Is that something we can get from the tax roll, or is that, I'm not sure where that number came from, but at one point it was 4,400 units of short-term rental, and I'm assuming that that's grown. That's not in the non-residential, on the non-residential side necessarily.
No, it would depend. Some would be in some of the condo hotels would be individually titled, whereas the kind of fee simple, if council recalls that terminology from previous presentations from the assessors, are one non-residential property. So it isn't necessarily easy to tell. We would have to pull that information from a different way rather than necessarily the tax rolls wouldn't necessarily give us the number of rooms per se.
That would be very interesting to note because we have had a lot of growth on the non-residential side in the last few years. So, and hotel properties would be part of that, but the unit count would be not individual like it is in condo hotels. So that would all be aggregated. Okay, thank you.
I think the number you may be remembering was something that Canmore Business and Tourism had provided years ago. And it was based on the number of, mostly on the number of hotel rooms, and then also included the condo hotels. I don't remember it being as high as 4,400 units, but I expect TCK may have some light to shed on that question. Councillor McCallum?
I think that information might have come from the commercial needs assessment that we did in, I think, 2014, 2015. That might be a good place to start. And
yeah,
I believe that ECDEV is going to start a similar project. It was within the capital plan for 2022. But anyways, yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Right. So back to questions. We're just sort of having a sidebar conversation here. Are there any questions for Ms. Richardson? And certainly there's been Councillor Sanford. Go ahead.
Just to confirm, Ms. Richardson, the median price of a single family unit went from 939.5 in 2020 to 950,000.
Correct. Yeah.
So a single family home is median price now is 950,000 in our community.
And that there was the note there that does include non-condo, duplex, triplex, and fourplexes.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly there's been a lot of discussion around financial matters, both at the Finance Committee level and at Council as a result of COVID. So we've discussed all of the issues that lead to setting the tax rate at length. So I don't know if there's any surprises. The increase in tax requirement meets what Council had directed some time ago. The one I go to first is the residential tax per dwelling of our neighboring communities. Because I hear so often from members of the community that our taxes are unreasonably higher than anywhere else in the province. And I refer them to this chart that shows, in fact, Canmore's taxes per dwelling unit, which is a reasonable comparator, are right in the average. So I appreciate having this information to share. Councilor McCallum, you have a question?
I remember my question now. It was the number of appeals that the assessor has managed.
So once the deadline of the 21st passed, we currently have 8 assessment appeals. Those won't necessarily all go to a hearing. They may be resolved between now and the fall, but right now we have 8 formal appeals on file. No,
compared to last year, that's not bad at all. That's quite impressive. Thank you.
Any questions then for Ms. Richardson or anybody else on admin? Seeing none, thanks very much for all of the work that's gone into preparing this report and presenting it to Council.
welcome. Thanks.
With that, I will move that Council give a first reading to property tax rate bylaw 2021-13. I'll speak in support of the motion. This is a critical part of Council's work each year, and I think particularly after a difficult financial year that we've just been through with COVID, and knowing that it's not over yet, I feel that the town of Canmore continues to be very responsive to the needs of our community and to assuring that we have the tax requisition that's sufficient to manage to operate the community to the standard that our residents expect. And also with the tax requisition, we continue to plan for future needs that we may not be aware of yet, or needs that we are aware of with various reserves. This is a really difficult piece of Council's work, and I'm hoping that people in the community that are thinking about running for Council this coming year are online and listening to this presentation. My guess is nobody is, but it would be nice to think that future candidates are paying attention to this, which is one of the most, as I said, most important pieces of work we have to do. So with that, I will be supporting first reading of the bylaw. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too will support the bylaw as presented. I just wanted to thank Ms. Richardson for the excellent and elegant explanation of how all these tax variables fit amongst each other. I think it's quite a complex thing to produce, but I think it's also a very complex thing to explain. And I think you've done a really good job. And I do hope that people in the community who are wondering about how we come up with these numbers and how the taxation is organized and arranged in our community, and also the comparator communities that are presented in this are very interesting as well. I hope that people will watch this presentation because it is recorded, John, so they'll have an opportunity to do it at their leisure. I think it would be wonderful if people would watch this presentation and understand how complex it is, follow along in the agenda, and understand that that our administration is doing a really good job with this. So thank you very much, Ms. Richardson, and all the others in the department. I would be happy to support this bylaw.
Further discussion on the motion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. So I'm prepared to support definitely first reading of this, of our bylaw, property tax bylaw. And this is sort of the final piece of the entire puzzle, setting the actual mill rate. We've already approved the budget itself, and we're now just sort of calculating how the budget will play out amongst the populace. This is a tricky piece of work. This is my, I think, 11th budget. And every year, I actually had the opportunity to speak to a 6th grade, 6, 7, 8 class yesterday. And every year I learned something new about the work that our administration does within our community and the programs and services that we provide. As you pointed out, this has been a very difficult year, not only financially for some businesses, but just for general residents. Their jobs have been affected, their businesses have affected, and I really feel that council has done an excellent job of trying to really address a lot of those concerns and the base needs of our residents in the last year. I also know that for quite a few people in our community, nothing has actually changed for them financially. And so I think that that's been the difficult balance that council has had to achieve this year, is understanding that there's peoples whose lives have been affected so drastically, who are living alongside people who have just been mildly inconvenienced. And so I ask the public to give each other some space for grace as we work through our financial considerations in our community, because this isn't the final piece of work. Next year is going to be a tough budget year as well. And we know this. We know that the province is going to cut transfers and that that's going to affect our ability to budget moving forward. So yes, I agree with my colleagues. I thank administration for their hard work. And we have quite a few projects also that are quite needed that are coming up as well that we've balanced, and we've managed to balance the need of those projects with our finances. And again, patting ourselves on the back, the ability that what we've done over the years in terms of making sure we have strong and healthy reserves. So anyways, I'm prepared to go to first reading. Thank you.
Yeah, and just picking up on what you were saying, Councillor McCallum, it's really important to note that not only this council, but councils for many years and administration for many years have been focused and committed to building strong, healthy reserves, which has an effect on tax requisition. Part of our taxes are going directly to reserves or savings accounts, so that when stuff happens, like happened last year, we're in a healthy situation and we can use our reserves. We dug down into our reserves quite significantly this past year to keep the community strong. So that's one aspect of the annual tax requisition that I think many in the community just aren't aware of or don't think about, is the need to be sure that future financial health of the community is assured through strong reserves. And I've always felt really positive about the work that Town of Canmore Council and Administration have done in that regard. Further discussion for first reading, Councillor Comfort.
I also will support this bylaw in first reading. And I can't say any more than you have already, my colleagues have already said, except to say, to speak to the transparency of the process, and that Canmorites get all the information they need. It's available on the website. You can talk to people. You can talk to your counselors and get information you need. And I really applaud our administration for continuing that transparency in that process as much as they are able. There are times when things have to go in camera, but they're so rare, and you can get all the information that you need. Nothing is being hidden. Nothing is secret. This is not, I don't know, communist Russia, maybe, not like that. It's a free democratic process, and you can get all the information you need. So go and look for it. So I will support this bylaw.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. I'll then move the council give second reading to property tax rate bylaw 2021-13. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. Move the council go to the third reading of the property tax rate bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. And I'll then move the council give third reading of property tax rate bylaw 2021-13. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. And I'll now move the council give first reading to supplementary property tax rate bylaw 2021-14. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council give second reading of the supplementary property tax rate bylaw. Discussion on that motion. See none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. I'll move the council go to third reading of the supplementary property tax rate bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously, and I'll then move the council give third reading to the supplementary property tax rate bylaw 2021-14. Discussion on that motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And once again, echo the words of my fellow councillors. Thank the entire finance team, Ms. Richardson, for all of the work that your team continues to do to keep our community strong and healthy. Thank you. That, I believe I will move to item H1, the anti-racism update to respectful workplace policy. Ms. DeSoto.
Thank you, Mayor Borelman and council members. I have a quick presentation to share.
I'll just ask, there we go, Councillor Comfort, thank you.
Oops. Okay, so I'm here today to present an update to the respectful workplace policy. And specifically today, the policy is proposed to be updated to include anti-racism and anti-discrimination language and approaches into the policy, as well as some other minor updates. As council and the entire community is aware, last summer, just as the first wave of the pandemic was easing, there were Black Lives Matter protests happening across the United States and really around the world. And they were highlighting the racial injustice that Black, Indigenous, and people of color experience in our communities. And in Canmore, we had our own protest. And at the time, it really moved administration, and I know it moved our community. And so administration began to turn our minds to how we might begin to address racism and any systemic discrimination that exists knowingly or unknowingly in our organization. And so our corporate strategic team got together and started to have discussions around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and what priorities we could consider including into our work plan. And so for this year, we have identified a number of priorities. And first on the list was to launch an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee, which we did last November. We set up terms of reference and some framework for the committee. We asked for volunteers, and we received approximately 12 staff put their name forward from 6 different departments. And that committee has now had the opportunity to meet 4 times. And one of the things they did look at and review was this respectful workplace policy that I'm bringing to you today. So the next priority was to establish a vision for equity, diversity, and inclusion at the town of Canmore. And I'll get to that in a couple of slides, but it's embedded in the policy statements of the respectful workplace, which was our next priority, was to update that policy to include that vision and an EDI lens. Some things we haven't yet done but intend to do this year is to conduct a baseline survey with all staff, just to identify gaps in area of focus for where we could turn our attention to address systemic or just racism within our organization. And then we're going to be rolling out some equity, diversity, and inclusion training and education across the organization. So let me turn now to that EDI vision that has been incorporated. It's right in the opening couple of paragraphs embedded in the policy. And I just am going to read out those 2 statements because I hope, like me, you find them powerful and meaningful. And if we can include our organization or create an organization that follows these visions, then I think we've done a great job. So at the town of Canmore, we believe that all people have a right to interact with the town in an environment that is free of racism and discrimination, where they are treated fairly, with dignity, respect, and honesty, and where behaviors and practices not in alignment with these principles are not tolerated. And then the next statement, a little bit lengthier, is that we recognize that discrimination, and particularly racial discrimination towards Black, Indigenous, and people of color, may be intentional or unintentional, conscious or subconscious, and we are committed to taking all steps necessary to remedy circumstances where an individual or group may be excluded from town activities, services, programs, or work opportunities, which they ought to have a right to be included in. So those statements didn't used to be in our respectful workplace policy and now are embedded in that policy. So some of the other updates, in addition to adding that anti-racism lens and language, which includes the definitions of racism and anti-racism, we've also expanded the policy to include our systems of governance. So the past policy really addressed behavior and behavior towards each other and the behavior we expected of the public towards us and of course of our staff towards residents and public members. But with this new policy update, we've included a couple of statements. There's a definition for governance that's right in section 8, item G. And governance means the interpretation and application of rules, regulations, policies in order to make decisions for and on behalf of the municipality. So that's really the realm of council. And the expectation that the next policy statement is the first one that's up there, is that it applies to all our activities, including our work environment, as well as to the interpretation and application of our bylaws, regulations, policies, procedures, and procurement requirements. So that is all around governance and how we govern. We want to make sure that that those regulations, policies, processes, procedures do not either intentionally or unintentionally put up barriers for people along race lines or discriminatory lines. We've also taken the opportunity, and our HR department did provide a number of amendments to be included so that we better align with occupational health and safety legislation as well as human rights legislation. So specifically, there's some new legislation in OH&S that requires us to address harassment and violence in specific ways. And so the policy has been updated to include that. And then lastly, there was some general tidy up done to format our new policy format and typo corrections. Some of the other considerations that we looked at, as I mentioned, we did have some stakeholder engagement as the policy update was reviewed internally by the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee. It was also shared with the management team and corporate strategic team. And we did consider an anti-racism policy as a standalone policy, as opposed to embedding it within our respectful workplace policy. However, the policies that we reviewed that were standalone policies really were much broader than internal policies themselves. They applied to the community as a whole. And so we felt that with amending the respectful workplace policy, it was a great place to start. We would begin with internal considerations. And if at some point council wishes to do some of the anti-racism work that is happening, in many communities across Canada, mostly larger communities, to be honest, but to do some anti-racism work with the community, we might want to consider an anti-racism policy that is a standalone policy. And with that, that was all I was going to present today. The recommendation is that you approve the update to the respectful workplace policy as presented, which incorporates anti-racism principles and expands the policy to address anti-discrimination in our governance systems. And with that, I will stop sharing and answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much for bringing this to council and for leading the conversation with administration. It is a very important conversation that we should have had, and we did. We'll continue to have this discussion. In the staff report, you mentioned that there was 12 staff participating from across 6 different departments, and I'm just assuming that was a balanced group of staff. Racially balanced. I assume that it wasn't all white people, us deciding what the policy should say.
That's a great question. And in all honesty, we took those who volunteered and put their names forward. So we didn't specifically ask any from racial minorities to contribute, although several have stepped up and have been willing to participate and assist us with this work.
That's great. Happy to hear that. I have a question just for understanding in the policy itself, policy statement number 2, it starts off, we also recognize that discrimination for all protected grounds. What's protected grounds refer to?
Protected grounds refers to human rights legislation and those elements that are protected under human rights legislation. So it's all levels of discrimination, racial discrimination, religious discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination. Yeah, and those are considered protected grounds.
So that wording is understood by people that are involved in these matters on a regular basis.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Comfort.
Yeah, I had a question about EDI priorities identified by the CST and supported by the committee include number 4 is to provide education and training across the organization. Do you have any idea how that's going to roll out, and will the community be involved?
So no, the community will not be involved. Right now, this is specific to internally to our organization. And the terms of reference for the committee is really internal. You know, if council would like to see work done community-wide, that would be something we would have to add to our programming plan and look at how to resource that. The committee is currently looking at a number of education and training resources and sort of proctoring them. The committee themselves are going to go through some of the training and then determine what's best. And then we will make the training mandatory for all staff in our organization. Yes.
Great, thank you. That's a good answer to my question.
There are other questions this time for Ms. DeSoto. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. DeSoto. I've noticed in a number of places the changes that have been made have eliminated the mention of business partners. So in the policy statement, number 1, and business partners is crossed out. In number 2, business partners is crossed out. And I'm just wondering, the respectful workplace policy did include behavior and interaction with business partners, but now we're taking that out of this policy?
Yeah, so that's a good point, Councillor Sanford, and that was intentional. There was a lack of clarity around who a business partner was at the committee when the committee reviewed it. So in my understanding, it included our arm's length organizations, say the library, Arts Place, CCH, even maybe Bow Valley Regional Housing, who we just heard from Mr. Wilson. However, it was understood that those are all even though they're arm's length or we may participate with them, they are standalone organizations that have their own policies, and we really have no ability to enforce our policies on those organizations. So we didn't feel that we could influence them through our policies.
But we do expect them, I mean, we do expect all people to interact.
Right, so they would just, yeah, they would be covered by contractors, external, residents and people who interact with the town. Yeah.
You also mentioned that there would be a survey to determine the baseline of interaction within the town. Would that survey be available for council's review at some point?
Yes, absolutely. I think we could share that with council. We could even have council potentially participate in the survey. Again, it's going to be focused on internal experiences. So I've seen a draft of the survey. It's being reviewed by the committee. You know, we will ask questions of, do any of our processes, have you experienced racism in the workplace or discrimination in the workplace? And you know, it is intended to be anonymous and discreet and confidential so that people are willing to be open with the goal of improving our overall systems and processes and policies.
Yeah, I think that would be very insightful because we have had a respectful workplace policy in place for quite a long time. So I'm just wondering how much of that is covered and how much is a gap and what is the gap that needs to be filled. So I'd be happy to see those survey results, especially if they're anonymous, obviously. So thank you.
Okay.
There are other questions at this time from Ms. DeSoto. Seeing none, thanks very much for bringing this report to council and as I say, leading the work to prepare this important addition to our respectful workplace policy.
Thank you.
And with that, I will move the council approve the update to the respectful workplace policy as presented to incorporate anti-racism principles and expand the policy to address anti-discrimination in governance systems. And I certainly will speak in support of this motion. I spoke earlier about the real importance, the need to address these matters not only nationally, provincially, but also in in the community, and this is where people live, and this is where things like discrimination are felt most directly, perhaps. So I think it's really commendable that the town of Canmore administration is taking a lead in our community and in broader scope on addressing these issues. So yeah, happy to support this amendment to the policy. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too would be happy to support the update to the respectful workplace policy. Last summer, we saw an uprising in our population and in our country that was really intolerant of any more racial discrimination. And I know that it is something that has always been on my mind as a councillor in this community. It's a fairly homogenous community in which to be in. And so as we've seen the faces of our community change, I'm proud to say that our organization is leading by example and ensuring that those people feel safe and welcomed and included within our community through this policy itself. We have a lot more work to do as a community, but I believe that this is an important first step. And so I'm happy to support these amendments.
The discussion on the motion. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too am happy to support the amendments to the respectful workplace policy. I'm glad that it is an amended policy as opposed to a standalone policy, because I think it will be more holistic in the way that it can be delivered to the organization. I also think that people who work for the town should feel safe in the workplace and respected, whether that's interactions with the community or amongst each other. And I think that this particular policy will help advance that and expand the inclusivity and the acceptance of our overall scheme of how we are in the community. And I think it's going to be worthwhile pursuing the gaps that may exist and to increase the understanding amongst the organization. So yes, I'd be happy to support it.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. That I will move to item H2, the CUPE Collective Agreement. Ms. Sauvé.
Good morning, Mayor Borman and members of council. We do need to move in camera for the first portion of this presentation.
Great, I'll move the council go in camera. Those in support? Opposed? We're going in camera. Waiting. Okay, it appears as though everybody successfully made it out of the in-camera room. And we're back in a public session. So in regards to the report that was presented in the agenda package on the CUPE Collective Agreement, I had a couple of questions that members of the public might have, so I'll ask them at this time. At the bottom of the first page of the report, it notes the wage increases at 0.5%, 1%, 1.3%, and 1.3% over the next several years. And I'd like to ask a question that around COLA. Is COLA enter into this agreement, or is COLA not a part of the discussion? And you're muted right now, Ms. Sobey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Borman. COLA is not a part of the agreement. The negotiated increases in this agreement are all encompassing.
So there is no COLA on top of these increases?
There is not.
Great, thank you. And could you just provide a brief understanding of the signing bonus, what that entails and how that works?
The signing bonus is just as it sounds. It's a bonus that members of the bargaining unit receive in exchange for signing the agreements. It is a way to negotiate wages for the employees in this unit that does not impact their base pay and recognizes the work that we do as a bargaining team together to come to a settlement.
Great, thank you very much. Are there other questions at this time for members of council for Ms. Sauvé on this report? Seeing none, thanks very much for bringing this report to council for consideration, and to you and your team for the work that you do in this in creating agreements, not only with this union but the IAFF as well. I think over the years, HR has really done a stupendous job of developing positive and successful relationship with the two unionized groups, so that we seem to be getting really good agreements approved in generally speaking, fairly short time. I recall not that many years ago where it could take much longer than the, what was it, 2 months of discussions that went into this agreement. So again, that says a great deal about the work that your department is doing, but also the relationship that has developed because of the trust, I think, that exists between the unionized groups and town administration. So thank you for all of that work. And with that, I will move the council authorize the signing of the collective agreement between the town of Canmore and the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE Local 37, as presented. And I will speak in support of this motion. I think the agreement is well formulated and is respectful to both parties, the town and the union employees. I think this is a good agreement. And I think it's important that we continue to have strong and respectful discussions with our unionized groups. So I will happily support this motion and support the signing of the agreement. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Barman. I too would be happy to support the authorization of the signing of this collective agreement. I believe that the HR department has done an excellent job bargaining with this union. They've put together a 4-year agreement, which is incredibly impressive within labor circles. It is a fair agreement, I would agree, full of respect And I believe it provides an incredible amount of stability for both the employee as well as the employer. So I'm happy to support this. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. With that, I will move on to the last item on the agenda. Item H3, which is the council representative for Canmore Public Art Committee. Ms. Hyde, you're here to speak to this report.
Oh, am I here? Here I am.
Yes, you are.
There I am.
There you
Actually, similar to the last time we brought a similar report forward, I'm wondering if Councillor Comfort would like to speak to this report.
By all means, Councillor Comfort.
Can do. Councillor McCallum was kind enough to step into my position on the Public Art Committee while I continued to recuperate. Was in convalescence for health reasons. And she now is finding her plate rather full. And I would like to return to the Public Art Committee, and we have spoken to them about it, and they're in agreement about that. And so this is to put the stamp on that discussion.
Well, that's the can-do attitude we like to see.
Oh, thank you, Your Honor.
There's, yeah, no, I'm not going to go there. So, are there any questions from members of council? I see none. I think, Councillor McCallum.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to add to Councillor Comfort's words. I enjoyed my time on the Public Art Committee. I actually was on the Public Art Committee, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or so. Maybe it was longer when it first started. Anyways, it's a great group of people, incredibly hands-on, incredibly passionate about what they do. They put a lot of work, time, and energy into their monthly meetings. Great council rep. And really, actually, even though it was 6 or 7 months, really enjoyed my time. But as Councillor Comfort has articulated, I think all of our plates are quite full, and I was hoping that Councillor Comfort would be interested in taking her time back on the Public Art Committee, because I know she also enjoys her time with those folks, and she was happy to take it back now that she's back and well. So thank you for loaning it to me, Esme, but you're happy to have it back. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay. Great. With that, I'll move the council appoint Councillor Esme Comfort to the Canmore Public Art Committee until the October 2021 annual organizational meeting, and rescind the appointment of Councillor Joanna McCallum. And I'll be happy to support this motion. It's great that Councillor Comfort will have the remaining 6 months of this term sitting on that committee, because I know Councillor Comfort has really enjoyed that involvement, and I'm certain the Public Art Committee has been happy to have Councillor Comfort involved. So, yeah, I'm happy to support this motion. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I believe that brings us to the end of the meeting. I will move council be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. See you.